very excited to be here and be able to tell this story. This started evolving about 9 months ago, and it's been from ideation to getting an engagement in place to now like going live with this relationship and being able to take a step back and tell the story of what that actually was. So personally, seeing like Emma, what you've been able to do at CBRE and bring business lines together and make this real, and then Brett, like how you were able to just drive it forward has been amazing to kind of see that from the outside. So when we look at this, Brett and Emma have been the co-authors of this really substantial deal that happened and was announced January 17th. So about 9 months from ideation to execution, about 76 days from announcement date on January 17th to when it actually went live. And just to make it real, 65 million square feet, about 100 office assets, hundreds of people. So when you think about it, people that are sitting like in their jobs with Brookfield and then moved over to CBRE. So the rebadging and the people management and communication, all of that happening within a very short amount of time. The tech lift that the team had in terms of making sure that people still had access to applications and could operate with minimal impact to the tenant experience. And then just overall, like the overall communication and like orchestration to make that happen was really amazing. So hopefully that makes it a bit real, and we're going to talk about how that actually happened and why it happened. So before we go into that, could we just do a couple of introductions? Maybe Brett first. Sure. Just a bit of background.
So that's what I looked like before the deal, just to be
Sorry.
Just saying. Yeah. My name is Brett Fox. I have been at Brookfield for about 22 years. No one leaves Brookfield, so we stay for a very, very long time. I started in the office business. When I started in New York, we had about 35 people in New York. We now have about 1,000 people in Brookfield Place, and then some other places in New York, so the company has changed dramatically over that time. We started as an owner-operator of office assets. That was it, right? We had other lines of business across what became the Brookfield affiliated family. We had renewables, we had a lot of Canadian investments. We had sugarcane in Brazil. We had all sorts of stuff. But over the time I have been there, we changed from an owner-operator of real assets to an alternative asset manager. And that migration really has reflected in how we think about the various parts of our business now. The focus is obviously on what we now call BAM, or Brookfield Asset Management, which is our investment management business. We also talk about Brookfield Properties, which is our captive real estate manager, with great pride, and talk about it as adding value beyond just what an investment manager can do. But at the end of the day, we think, are you taking a picture, Tom? Oh, you're killing me. But at the end of the day, we really think about, what do we do best? And where I started, to go back to your question, is I'm actually a trained lawyer, so probably one of the few in the room. And over time at Brookfield, because of that crazy growth over the time I've been there, I've been given the privilege and opportunity to do a variety of things. So at one point I ran BAM's IT, internal audit, HR reported to me at some point for parts of the business, and a variety of operating roles. And because of the role I now sit in, which is a managing partner within the investment management side, or what we call Brookfield Property Group, I'm still the general counsel of that group, responsible for legal and regulatory. But because of that experience, because of all the privileges I had to see different parts of the business, I also have an operating role within Brookfield Properties, which really led to this deal.
Awesome. Emma.
What an intro. Hi everyone, I'm Emma Buckland. I am actually based in Texas, despite my accent. So I like to surprise people with that fact, but I am also a Brit, full disclosure. I've been at CBRE for coming up to 8 years in August, which is kind of amazing to think about. I joined in our property management business. I ran that business in the UK, and then I was asked to take on the role leading our team globally in 2020, which on balance was not great timing, but that's a story for a cup of coffee. But my background is actually not real estate. So I did an MBA, and then before that I worked in financial services. I worked for Goldman Sachs, and I also worked in software. I worked for a company that many of you will know as a credit scoring provider called FICO, but in Europe they've got a big software franchise. I ran that team in Europe for a few years. So I don't come from a typical, and I started off as a management consultant, so I don't come from a typical kind of real estate background, and in some ways, as we talk about kind of what's been different about this transaction, but probably what's the hallmark of the way we think about running property management in our firm right now, I would say a lot of that is to do with the fact that we surround ourselves with people that have real estate expertise, but also have backgrounds that are different. And I think there's a different way to think about the thing that we've been doing for a long time and considering is pretty commoditized in some ways. A little bit of context just about CBRE's property management business. So we've got just over 3 billion square feet. We operate in over 40 markets around the world. And we've got now just coming up to 19,000 staff. So we've got a pretty big kind of base of capability and experience to draw from. And that's something that we'll talk more about as we go through.
Excellent.
So that's us.
Thanks.
Not at all.
Okay, so jumping back to Brett. So top 3 global investor, you're sitting in Brookfield Place and trying to figure out, like, what do I do next? What's my next project? What made you like, what made this idea come real?
So there was some mild reference to some distress in office that some of you may know about. But, you know, we had been growing, we continue to grow. We're just in the midst of raising our next global opportunistic fund, but just acquiring over the last 5 to 10 years, even through COVID, right? So when people aren't back in the office, which is a terrible statistic, we were back in June of 2020. And so we did not stop, and the growth was just exponential over that time. With growth of that sort in any sector, in any place, there's some inefficiency. And so what we wound up with was about 6,000 operating professionals in our real estate business in North America. That included 200 or so IT folks and about 600 what we call finance folks, but that could be accounting, that could be AP, that could be AR, a whole array. Inherently, there's some efficiency to be had there. We were all on different systems, and that was across multiple sectors. And so the thinking was, how do we improve our margins? How do we make sure the services we're providing as that value add to BAM is maintained, but at the same time, we can do it, frankly, cheaper. And we can do it more efficiently. And so when we looked across that, I've been working with 2 of my crime partners, Soheil and Renee Friedman, who's not here today, to really say, what can we do better? And so we looked particularly at finance, particularly at IT, and said, we just have people who are doing multiple things in different sectors that really are true commodities, that really should not be done. And so we said, let's go to office first, because frankly, that's my history, that's Renee's history, that's Soheil's history, and let's look at that because we have the deepest knowledge base, and we have great internal support to do that, and then said, how do we make this better? And ultimately, what we said is, look, we can do accounting alone, but an office doesn't really get you there, right? And so we said, let's do property management as well. And when we started doing that, we really looked out and said, who are our partners? Who had we been talking to? We actually had conversations with CB years ago for a very, very small slice. And we went back and said, can you help us with this? We talked to some other players in the market, and really CB came through and said, no, here's a full package of things we can do for you in a way that's different. And it kicked off last June?
July,
okay.
We actually met after, I always get it wrong in the American calendar. What's that weekend in July? Oh yeah, of course.
4th of July.
4th of July, of course.
Yeah.
I should remember that. Independence from the Brits.
You blocked it out, I know.
But it was after that we met. It was after that weekend.
Yeah.
So a Brit at heart, based in Texas, but now you're kind of based in New York after
we tried.
Exactly. I'm a global citizen, Margaret. That's the way to think about it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. When you got that call, what was your initial reaction to that?
Obviously, I think anybody in my seat, that's like the dream call. But to be honest, I think we didn't know whether it was serious. So I think a lot of self-managers will tell you this question about how are we creating value? Is there a better way to do it? It's probably on the table in the boardroom of most organizations every year, right? You're like, is this a thing we should think about? Yes, no. They do a bit of a desktop study, make a few calls, maybe get a bit of pricing, and then everyone's happy that they want to continue to operate in the model that has always kind of reigned. And so to some extent, I suspected that was what it was, and not in a bad way, right? But kind of a bit of market testing. But because of that, in some ways, it gave us a bit of a free rein to think, you know what, we're going to just try and bring the whole firm to this opportunity and not think about it the way that organizations think about outsourcing property management. And I think that was probably at the heart of what for Brett felt like something different. We've got this enormous occupier business, our GWS business. whilst the structure is different and the client is different, a lot of the realities of managing assets are similar, and there's all sorts of stuff in that business that we could leverage, that we've leveraged as part of this relationship, but also there's other pieces around the firm where when you kind of pull together the sum of the parts, we felt like there was a different way to contemplate this that wasn't a traditional outsourcing operation and was really a partnership. And so I took it, brought the team together, and that's what we pitched, and the rest is history.
And so let's just continue on that piece. So you actually formed a new line of business off the tail of this deal.
We did.
Do you want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, of course. So we've called it investor portfolio management, and really it's about addressing this idea that there is a different way to operate. So especially in the US, so if we just talk a little bit about our global business, we've got big businesses in most markets around the world, but we particularly drew on experiences that we had in Australia, where we manage for 3 of the top 5 REITs, and also in Europe, where we've got a number of relationships that are dedicated in nature. So we work for M&G as their dedicated real estate management partner, work for AXA, we work for a few other clients. So we had some experience of kind of being in a more dedicated model and recognise the value of that. But we also saw some of the things that we thought our partners in GWS did, frankly, in a slightly more sophisticated way than we did, around things like transformation. So working with a client to help change not just the way we operate with them, but also potentially the way they operate internally and how we think about leveraging technology and data, but also things like procurement. So I think a lot of property managers will tell you they are doing a good job of managing cost in an asset. The reality is when you start to look at a portfolio level and you start to aggregate the opportunity and you start to think about not just the cost savings, but also the service delivery and innovation opportunities that sit inside your supply chain, there's a lot of stuff you can do with that. But that's not something that a traditional owner is doing today, because they're buying building by building, asset by asset, and our ability to help a client in some ways is kind of prevented, because in the States right now, and I think if JLL were on the stage or Cushman were on the stage, everyone is probably managing like somewhere between 15% and 30% of a large institutional client's portfolio. And so your ability to really maximize value and think strategically is limited, because you're simply doing a piece of it and everything is trading all the time. So we set this business up thinking there's a better way. Yeah. And that's our strong conviction. And I think there will continue to be our core business where clients want to buy individual assets, individual locations, and we will still do a really great job of that. But then there's a different way to structure where you want a partnership and you want to be able to bring the firm in a much more strategic way. And that's what investor portfolio management is for us.
So Mark, one thing, we tried to avoid exactly what Emma was just suggesting on the one-offs, because we could have done an RFP in each market and said, who's the best provider, and are you a little better in DC versus New York, and we would have then retained an organization that spent all their time managing that building's manager. And we didn't want to do that. We wanted to take a different approach and say, on a portfolio basis, these functions, are we the best at, or is someone else better? Is it, and we're great, we're amazing, Brookfield's amazing, but there are things that but there are things that maybe we don't do as well. And when we look at the scale, as big as we are, and we have a large portfolio of very large assets, CB is still, when you add our portfolio together, they have 90% more. Right? And so that scale in some of these commoditized activities just makes a difference. It's just math. As Elodie said, it literally is just math. You can buy something for 10 of them or 100 of them. Where are you going to get the better pricing? And your people, are they going to be trained once, or can they be trained to do all sorts of stuff across 10 times the amount of assets? And so are there things we can do better, but not looking at individually, but really holistically at a partnership level, which was the difference for us.
Yeah. And so just to take a brief step back on that, so CBRE has operated separately for asset services and global corporate services for years, right? And you came in and you said, let's do it differently, let's think about it differently. And those two groups actually came together to execute so beautifully on this deal, right? Like having been in the inside of CBRE for years and seeing how it was executed on by just bringing that expertise and forming a new line of business. And then watching on the Brookfield side, you've had property managers that have been sitting at buildings for 20 plus years. And this was a big change for them. And you've been able to retain through the transition, like those people, right? Just yeah,
so we had 900 plus people who moved over, and we had a 99 point something acceptance rate for the transfers.
Yeah.
So we had 8 people who didn't go over. 4 retired, and 4 already had jobs they were taking anyway.
Yeah. So
No, I was just going to say, I think just to build on that point, I think part of why I think it worked well, and we're in the early stages. Brett's going to make it clear later on, I'm sure. Things like still, and of course we get up every day and we are determined to continue to succeed in this partnership. But actually, I think because our business in property management globally at the top is not run broadly by solely people that have property management expertise, but we've got quite a broad skill set. Tushar, who's in the audience today, who leads business transformation for us globally, is a really good example of somebody who's got a non-industry background that really helps us kind of think differently about the organization. Our leader of IPM, Craig Huddleston, we've got many others. And I think that balance of deep expertise in property management, but also a little bit of innovation and different thinking, helps us not be constrained by what we expect property management to be, because my expectations for our organization and our team are not everybody else's expectations. And I think the reality of life is you kind of rise to the level of what people expect of you, right? Yeah. And so it didn't occur to us that we couldn't do this or that it wouldn't be successful. And I think everybody in our organization has kind of bought into that and delivered accordingly.
Yeah, amazing. Let's jump to the partnership side then. So how did you, two again, very large companies, top 3 investor, largest commercial real estate services company. How did you build that partnership to execute so quickly and successfully?
You're starting.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
Really, I'll remind you that later. Look, we started with the proposition of you guys do this for a living every day. So instead of having an RFP that listed 50 things we needed, we went in and said, if we give this to you, what are you going to do? What is your approach? And we have been doing this for a very long time. As you said, we have people who are very tenured. We had one gentleman who moved to CB who was there for 40 years. He actually started when he was 12, absolutely. But it was, instead of doing things we've always done, which in real estate, you said the assets don't move and sometimes the people don't either, how do you migrate? How do you maybe crackle some eggs in order to progress to a place that is better? And so our approach was, you guys do this, you are the best at this, and so tell us how to do it. And we started with that approach. And then the goal, and I'm a trained lawyer, as I said, so I love to win legal points, but the idea was not to win every point. Because I've done other outsourcing, this is not outsourcing, but I've done other outsourcing where you try to win that last point and it turns out your partner becomes just a vendor who's trying to get the last penny on that margin and you've taken that penny away so they have no incentive to perform well. That doesn't lead to a good partnership. Maybe on one commodity for one thing you get a victory and you go have a drink, but it doesn't get you where you need to be. And so this was about how do you succeed, how do we succeed, and have a common goal. And it was, oh wow, that was magical. I didn't know I was that powerful. And so it was. Did my mic die?
No, I think your mic went off too.
Okay, I'm pretty loud. I'll keep going. Oh,
there we go. It's back.
Okay, and so how do we get to that common place where we can both be successful and both turn to our leadership teams who are very supportive and say this is good for both organizations?
Yeah, Emma.
Yeah, that's right. I'd also say I think because of the way Brookfield went about it, because of that point of we don't just want a sort of templated RFP, we really thought very creatively about the whole organization. So we worked extensively, not just with the property operations team and the scope that we were taking on, but we also worked heavily with the finance and accounting organization, the retained business, and we worked heavily with the asset management team, not just from the perspective of management, but also leasing, right? So how does this ecosystem of activities work? And how do we want it to operate? And we spent a lot of time really thinking about roles and responsibilities so that we weren't just thinking about the humans that were going to be moving organizations, but we really understood, this is kind of fun.
I'm glad this is an IT
we really understood the activities and we thought about there we go. So I'll lower my voice. We thought about how we wanted to organize ourselves basically to get those things done. And I think that was incredibly helpful because it allowed us maybe to do some things a little bit differently than we would normally do them. No problem.
Your mic's off now. I don't know
worry.
if people can hear Emma. She's not quite as loud as Brett.
Yeah, exactly. Don't worry.
Okay. Okay.
We're good with that.
We just
Yeah.
need mics, yeah? Mics are off? Are we getting mics back on? Okay.
And the poor guy has no stress on him, so it's
Yeah,
good.
exactly. No pressure.
Does Brookfield own convene?
Yeah. Can't we get? Isn't someone
take
here in
the
the real
fifth.
estate operations business? I think, yeah, exactly.
So I think my mic is still on.
Yeah, yours is on.
Is yours
is
on?
mine?
Is mine? Yours is?
Is yours on now?
I don't think so. I think mine's off.
This is off.
How's that? No. Any better? Oh, yeah.
There you go.
Right.
What was your question?
Okay, now I forgot my question.
I think we should talk about culture. So you talked about the partnership
Yes,
and what made
yes.
it work. I think something else that's worth
Good
talking
return to
about
script.
is
Well done.
something else is culture, just because that's something you just can't legislate for. And I think that definitely helped the pace that the transaction occurred at, because we are both pretty
Intense?
fast-paced people, as you're probably learning.
Really?
Yeah, a little bit. And we don't like to take no for an answer. But also the way the teams worked and operated, genuinely every combination, we set up quite quickly a lot of work streams to look at the different parts of the organization, whether that's technology or operations or accounting. And the pairs we put together, there was a lot of alignment in terms of the way we operated, what we wanted, just the way we even kind of got things done. And I think that hugely helped. And that wasn't something that either of us, I think, knew at the get-go, but we could feel quite fast that was going to work well, and that certainly helped the pace of execution, I would say.
I agree. And look, we charged the teams with actually doing this as their full-time job. This wasn't something they did on the corner of their desk. Emma's team, which is very global, all flew in, and it was like the UN in our offices for a few weeks. But they all flew in, right? And as opposed to Zoom and every other great technology that we all love, we actually sat in conference rooms. It was old school, very old school. Yeah. Sat in conference rooms in person for hours. Went out for drinks after, because we're real estate people, and got it done. Right, like pounded through an agenda, and Margaret sat with us, so she's pretending she wasn't there. She was with us every step of the way.
Absolutely right.
And pounded through agenda after agenda, and didn't just table things to say, let's talk about this later, it's too hard. Like, we went through the hard stuff, and we had people in the room who could decide, and when those people in the room couldn't decide, we escalated very quickly and went back and iterated again. And so it was an intensity, it was intense, but it was an intensity to get something done. And just in terms of timeline, we went back and had a preliminary model that was done, because again, we all want to make money but save money, a model that I took back to the two people who I was accountable to internally on September 11th.
Exactly, 9/11.
I know,
We'll
bad
never
date,
forget
bad
that
date.
day. Yep.
But said, look, we think there's something here. We have to contract, we have to get through this, but we think we're compatible in terms of cultures, such that we can get to a deal where we could have a good outcome. They said, okay, sounds good. And then we went forward and contracted before Christmas.
Yeah. And it was an incremental build along the way. You hadn't brought in any other external parties to help advise or do anything. It felt like it was truly two groups coming together to get the best outcome for both companies, right?
Yeah, so I as much as management consultants are fantastic, and Emma's prior life, amazing, it was very, very important to us that we were doing this for us and to us, and not that someone told us to do it, that a third party didn't say, this is the way to operate your business better. We know everything, and you guys should do it the following way. In fact, it's the opposite. We have, as we said, very, very long tenured employees who have a tremendous amount of knowledge, many of whom are now CBRE employees. And we had them iterate on what would they want if they had someone who was sitting in the seats that they used to sit in. And we retained some of those people, and some of them moved to CB. And that was probably the hardest part of the discussions on who's going, who's staying. Yeah. And as culturally, people are attached to the Brookfield name who have been here 20, 30 years, and so moving those folks was really the biggest issue overall. But once they saw the possibility, they saw what was possible for them, for their personal careers, their personal situation, and the cultures were truly aligned, it made it relatively easy. Easier than I thought it would.
Yeah.
And I think because of that sort of co-authoring, so we did work in a small group on both sides to start with, and then we brought groups in on both sides of the organization. We had a non-disclosure list by the end at CBRE of over 300 people who'd all signed up to say they wouldn't say anything, and there was some skepticism from both of our press teams about whether it would leak, and it actually didn't, so that was something we're super proud of. But we brought people in incrementally, but I think what really helped was that this wasn't some kind of top-down missive on either side. It was something that had been built by our respective people together, and so that creates a lot of buy-in, way more buy-in than me telling people it needs to be done in a certain way. Is our professionals that are experts in accounting saying, we have worked with the Brookfield team and this is how we want to do it and we feel great about it. The rest of the accountants buy that and everybody feels fine. And I think we all kind of held our breath in between, you know, Margaret talked about it earlier, but the 17th of Jan when we announced, and then the 2nd of April when we actually, all these employees became part of our firm, waiting for the moment where we were going to have some really significant challenges and feedback. And, you know, not to infer it's been perfect. There's always things in individuals where we've had some pieces to manage. But broadly speaking, everybody's really bought in. And I think that's been because it has been a co-created scope and not something that some people have done with some lawyers and forced down on an organisation that doesn't really work in real life. And I think that's been probably part of what's been successful.
And I think seeing the trust between the organizations, Emma, where you would show up to a meeting and you'd be like, yeah, we probably shouldn't do that, right? When it could mean more business for CBRE, I think that was, seeing that kind of from the outside looking in, building that trust between your organizations, right?
Look, agreed. We, along the way, looked at different sectors, different pieces, and said, well, if we're doing this, can we do that? And ultimately, both Emma and I decided, let's do what we started doing. Maybe we'll do some other stuff later. Maybe the partnership extends, but let's go to the core of where we started, make that really, really successful. So anything else we want to do, whether it's in a different country, a different sector, it's easy. Because say, no, see, this is all working. And it was the hardest, it's our longest hold business, right? Yeah. So office, again, when I started, we were in New York, Toronto, Minneapolis, and Denver. And that was it. Two buildings in Boston. And that was it, right? That was the entirety of our real estate portfolio. And so we've had it forever. We're the most attached to it. It has our name on it, right? There's a Brookfield place for a reason. And if we can do it in that sector where every one of our senior managers, so Bruce Flatt, Brian Kingston, all started in an office. Everybody has that DNA. And if we can do it there, we really can do it in other places. But, as Emma said, the transition was 4-2. We're very, very early, but so far, so good. I mean, in fact, we closed the quarter 4 days later. So all the people who worked for Brookfield, who went to CBRE, continued to do their jobs, and then closed the quarter and did public reporting in the next week. And so that's been the path so far. There will be bumps. But we have a governance, we have an escalation, we have all the good things to mitigate that when it happens.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing is we thought carefully from an employee experience perspective about the things. We cared a lot about trying to get that people piece right. So trying to get the comms right, trying to be extremely thoughtful about equipping everyone with as much information and sense of our business as we could. But at the same time, we also really thought about how to, I think, demonstrate the value of joining a firm that makes a living managing properties, right? We love doing that. We invest lots of money and effort and energy into, we think, being the best in the world at it. And we wanted to show that to the team that was joining CBRE. So whether that was training, health and safety training, we talked extensively, more than Brett ever thought about health and safety training. But that's something we feel really excited about, and actually so do the engineering team that has joined us. Or whether that's about opportunity for accountants, or whether that's about career development, or there's all sorts of things because of what we do for a living that is easy for us to take for granted, and perhaps maybe for the Brookfield team not to realise wasn't happening in the business you're operating in. But actually there was this story that we could tell where kind of everybody got something good out of it, and we really thought carefully about that comms and messaging so that hopefully people could feel as positive as possible about what was obviously a big change.
So let's just reiterate again, 76 days from January 17th till April 2nd, 65 million square feet, 100 assets, 950 people, all of the technology transition. You got to the second. What's next? Like, what outcomes? How do you think about things differently now that you've got, that this partnership is in place between Brookfield and CBRE? So, Brett,
yes.
What do you...
So there's going to be a period inevitably of stabilization. And so people who need to learn how to access their HR system differently than they did last week. How do I put PTO in? Wait, I have PTO, we used to qualification. So there's little things like that that are still gonna take a few months for people to work out and understand how reporting structure is different in CBRE than it is at Brookfield. At Brookfield, we are highly matrixed. We give tremendous amount of autonomy to our property managers, which in some cases meant that we didn't move as quickly as we could because everybody got to collaborate, which is was great until everybody got to collaborate. And then so, they are learning to do that differently in CBRE, and we're letting that play out. But in a parallel, we have asked Emma and Craig and others, give us that transformation exercise. Tell us, we're doing this is great. We have less people, we're able to focus on our real estate asset management and our investment management, that's fantastic. And so if somebody only has so much time in a day, should they be thinking about how do I maximize value of my asset, or how do I deal with what the engineers are doing? I know where I want them to be looking, and they know where they should be looking, and now they can. But beyond that, how do we then modernize our operations? How do we move forward on technology? How do we instill a standardization so we get better reporting, quicker reporting, better dashboards, all the things people want that in real estate have been challenging to do because of lack of data integrity, lack of data definitions. CB is going to be able to help us with that. We would have gotten there eventually, but eventually is a really long time. And so if we can accelerate that with CB, because again, they have many more assets than we do, they've seen it many more flavors than we have on that property operations piece. And at the end of the day, to our fund partners, to our public investors, we can't report anything unless we get the information from our properties, right? It all starts at that granular level. So if we can accelerate that piece, move that forward, modernize that, that's really that next step. And so we'll see what the next few months are based on what Emma and Craig propose, but we've talked a lot about it. We have concepts and ideas, and now we just got to move forward with it.
And it gives you also the ability you've talked about to move into new markets, or like the flexibility to do that without the load of bringing on that.
Yeah, so look, we have two primary, I'll stick with office, ways that we own our office assets. One is on what we call Brookfield Corporation, so the balance sheet, which are long-term hold, iconic assets, Brookfield Places, Manhattan West, those kinds of assets. And then we have other assets we own in our opportunistic funds or some of our other funds, which we're not going to own forever, right? They have closed end, we buy them, we change them, we operate them, and then ultimately we sell them. And so that, when office comes back, when we continue to buy office, and we're still always looking at office and always looking for opportunities in office, the ability to roll out management of that very quickly based on our standards, based on how we do things through CBRE is going to give us tremendous flexibility. Is that going to be tomorrow or next year? We'll see, right? That's about the macro of the market. But we are long-term owners of real estate and long-term investors in real estate. And so it will come back. Everything is cyclical. And when that happens, we will be ready with a partnership that allows us to do that much more quickly.
Setting up that operating model to be able to flex.
Correct.
Yeah. Emma, can you talk a bit about, when we were prepping for this, we were talking about the level of consistency. So, Brett needing to get to the data and needing to improve the performance of the assets, bringing CBRE in to bring that consistency in that. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that was really a foundational principle, is Brett talking about the transformation roadmap, this idea that we want to create for Brookfield a kind of playbook around what it means to be in a Brookfield asset. So that's a lot of things you don't see and a lot of things you do see. And obviously the things you do see, I think, are pretty consistent and well managed today. But in terms of some of the back of house pieces, definitely there's been differences between geographies and markets for lots of, acquisitions driven a lot of that. But our opportunity is to build what we feel jointly is really the absolute best-in-class way to operate an asset, and then be able to just roll that out, not just in the US ultimately, but obviously our ambition would be to be able to partner with Brookfield and do that around the world and in multi-asset types. But the exciting thing on our side for our team is being in a position with a client where we get a chance to actually contribute to that vision and help co-author it is super exciting. So often property management is a sort of point and shoot function. So we have an asset manager who has a very deep perspective about exactly what they want, and our teams just execute. And the challenge about that sometimes is you don't get the same level of empowerment. You don't also sometimes get the same level of best practice because they don't feel, they feel they're just kind of doing what they're told. So I think the nice thing between us is we get to say, okay, we've got all of this global experience, we've got all of these portfolios around the world that we operate for other clients. How do we think about what you're trying to achieve and the way that we continually bring innovation and ideas to you so that we can keep Brookfield kind of performing beyond their competitors from an operational perspective, alongside all of the stuff that's happening in terms of the asset management and the investment management side too. So, for our team, that's a really, really exciting prospect.
Yeah. We also talked about, we're at the Cherre Data Summit, so we should talk about data a bit.
We should.
But we should talk about data a bit. And that's been a big underlying piece of this whole deal, right? Is being able to get to enough information to make sure it makes sense to leverage off of each other. We talked a bit about the intersection of process and data, right? In the consistency of process and point of entry and discipline around that to ultimately then drive like what Brookfield needs. Can you talk a bit, one or both of you talk a bit about that?
Brett will have a view, I'm sure, but from my perspective, I think sometimes we like to use a lot of buzzwords in real estate, especially relating to everything in the technology and data realm, which broadly speaking, I would say as an industry, we're not as sophisticated as other industries. And I think that's kind of something everybody would acknowledge. For us, a lot of data is actually kind of collected and resulting from a lot of deeply operational processes that our teams are performing. And I think we think about operations and not data, and a lot of the time one creates the other. And so I think process excellence is a hugely important part of how we get to a data outcome that is going to give our client what they want. And it's not just the timeliness with which we're collecting the data, but it's also the process we're going through, the extent to which we can automate it, the way we're going about it, the platforms we're using to help us. So really thinking about all those pieces to help get to a product that is of higher quality. But to me, there is a big operational process element to that we will absolutely be contemplating as we think about kind of the data outcomes we're trying to drive for Brookfield.
Yeah, so for us, I always try to think about data and what am I using it for, right? What's my actual business requirement? Not just a pretty dashboard. They're cool, don't get me wrong, but what am I using it for? And so when we think about what we use it for, I really think about it in three ways. One, our public reporting. We still have public companies that have SEC requirements that require financial data and some non-financial data on our real estate assets, which we absolutely need. We have our private funds, which, as most of the people in this room know who deal with private funds, has gotten incredibly data intensive over time. Our fund partners, our LPs, have been asking for more and more information. Not 100% clear what they're using it for, but they ask for it. And so we're going to give it to them. Maybe they're convinced they're going to put it in some database and AI is going to tell them what to invest in. I'm not sure. But it's a tremendous amount of data and it's very granular. And so how do we access that? And then third, our management team, right? What information based on the data do they need to actually make decisions, right? Not just, hey, my debits and credits added, but can you help me determine, can the information help me determine how long to hold, how much capital invest, right? When to maybe refinance in terms of what's the best time in the market cycle to do that, all those kinds of things. And for us, we've had that data, but it has been an incredibly manual, incredibly time-consuming process where people spend weeks doing mapping tables in Excel of how do I call a building name, this other thing, that's this other thing. And so, and you all have lived this, to the point where, even in our office business in the US until last week, we had two different ERPs. We're running MRI and Yardi just 'cause. And it was too hard to migrate from one to the other. And then magically, when they had a deadline, it moved in a month and a half, something like that.
Magically.
Magically that happened.
Magically
It just magically happened. But it took us 5 years, but then 4 months. And so how do you align all of that data in a way to produce information that's actually actionable? And so what we're looking for CBRE to do is to help us do that. And that's about standardization, that's bringing tools that make it easier. It's about pushing the teams to deliver it more quickly, and then ultimately less manual intervention, right? Less people playing with that data, and I say playing, but using that data to create information that's as accurate as it can be, but not accurate enough, right? It needs to be better, it needs to be more efficient, it needs to be quicker, it needs to be more real time. And CB's part in that for us is going to allow them to do the underlying granular part in office, and then for us to do those next layers so we get the information we need for our stakeholders.
And I think part of the value of the whole project, which Brett talked about at the beginning, is this idea of the asset management community being able to focus on their core business, which is asset management. And in doing so, kind of the distance from the operations, where actually now Craig and Tushar and our team are starting to work with the asset management community at Brookfield to say, okay, what do you want to see? What do you want to see? What frequency do we need to see it at? How do we make sure we give you data that you can rely on in a format that's going to create insight for you to allow you to make a decision that you would make differently as a result of having that information? And that distance, in a way, is almost helpful in helping them think, okay, now these people are producing this for me. What do I actually want? And so For me, in a year's time, I'd love to be in a position where we could have our asset management team at Brookfield come up here and say, actually, the way we've been able to visualize and surface data is not only more accurate, but also is allowing us to make decisions in a more meaningful way than we were able to do before. That would be hugely, hugely powerful, I think.
I think Brookfield just building out your partner network, right? You've got CBRE now, you have Cherre. That's how you connect all of your data. I think having that muscle to now flex, right, and be able to try things. Like we talked about, just being able to try things.
Well, and look, real estate people, I think, are inherently risk adverse. Yeah. Right? Again, the assets don't move that quickly. This is not a hedge fund. You're not trading stocks every day, right? Like they're kind of tied down to the ground. And so some people generally are hesitant to make a mistake because it's permanent. Something happens to the building. Someone could actually die if something is gone wrong in a building, right? People's lives are at stake. We're not doing brain surgery, but there are health and safety issues. There are real issues as people walk around our assets. So it's real. But at the same time, what if you do make a mistake? You fix it, right? It's not the worst thing. So trying and moving forward and trying a few things, and if you're trying 5 things and 3 of them work, to me that's a win. Right? It doesn't mean all 5 have to work, and it doesn't mean someone failed because the 2 didn't work. And so it's experimenting, it's moving forward, but with the relationship with CB, it's having the ability to have the room to do that because you're not putting out fires all day. You're not reactive to the thing an asset manager needs because we built them a dashboard where they can access it itself. And so it's trying to get that sort of hygiene level data to people in a way where they can do their day-to-day, and then people, instead of mapping, what's the name of Starbucks in this building to the name of Starbucks in the other building, and they all have different LLC names, and someone spends... It's a real problem. No, I get it. Instead of them spending the time doing that, they're thinking about how do I strategically do something different, and so that's the difference. Yeah.
I was going to use the property mapping example, right?
So bad.
Yeah,
it's
so bad.
Yeah, so bad. So what Margaret is mentioning, so it was 100 and something properties, right? We had 7 different lists, none of them matched, right? And this is our own people, our asset management teams, and so to get the property list for what was actually moving over to CB to manage was 19, 20 iterations.
Crazy how common that is, though.
Yep.
Like that's not just a,
No, we're not special in this way, I am sure.
Yes. Crazy how common that is. So 1 year, 3 years, 5 years from now, if you were sitting on this stage.
Okay, I'll start there. So look, 1 year I want to say we are incredibly stable. The partnership has been successful. There's been some misses and we fixed them, we mitigated them. And here's the 5 value add things we got. I'm not even going to define them because I don't know what they're going to be. In 5 years, it is a broader partnership, hopefully in other sectors, hopefully in other regions, because of the base we started here. And hopefully the real estate cycle has come back where it's just fantastic and everybody is building new things and moving into new assets and they're trading at marks that we like, and we're expanding and growing. Right now it's not the optimal time, but we think it's coming back. And again, we are long-term real estate investors, and through every cycle imaginable. And so hopefully CB is there to partner with us through that.
Yeah, Emma.
I also love all of that. But I think on our side, obviously the Brookfield relationship is always going to be foundational for us, and I think so. My aspirations beyond what Brad's just talked about is that this is a place where we manage to bring the whole firm to you. So I think that's something that you look from the outside at a company like ours. There's so much we do it so well in so many places, but it's kind of tough to navigate, right? If I want somebody to do this or that, who do I call and how do I connect them? And geographies are different, and we've got this real opportunity through this relationship to be able to be that partner, to be a sounding board. We've already had a couple of situations where Brett's called and said, I'm thinking about this, can you connect me to someone who can do that? And it's not to say that Brookfield is going to choose CBRE to do that thing, but we've got an expert, we can find them, we can connect them, and they know how important Brookfield is to us as a global firm, and so they're going to kind of get on the phone and be able to be a thought leader for that person. And I think for Brookfield, that's super valuable in terms of the access to the breadth and depth of capabilities that our company's got, and I don't know that we're always as good as we could be at that. So my hope is this becomes the kind of role model example. And then selfishly for our business, I obviously hope our investor portfolio management business is materially bigger than it is now. So I hope
and we will always be your favorite client.
You'll always be my first love, Brett. You know that, always. But we hope that this creates a shift in the market because we think there's a better way, and we think this is the way. And I hope that Brookfield isn't the only client that feels that way, and the proof will be in the pudding. But that would be my hope in 5 years' time.
Yeah, yeah. We also just talked a bit about data-driven, right? So like making sure, getting to a point where you've got solid, reliable, accurate data to drive, like what are your decisions going forward? How do you
Agreed.
move forward? Yeah.
Agreed.
Okay. Anything else to add before we break?
I think I've said enough.
Said enough?
I'm good.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us.
Thank
Very
you.
much appreciate it.